So welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where, in which part of the world you're from. It's an absolute pleasure to invite you to the next episode of Navigating the World's Maritime Ecosystem, the Capital Link Forum podcast series with me, Punit Oza. I'm absolutely thrilled and tremendously privileged to actually have Cheong from Baltic Exchange. He's the head of Baltic Exchange in Asia. Jin, always a pleasure to see you. And I've got Chen from Xinhua, China Economic Information Services. Together, Baltic and Xinhua actually bring out the amazing document, the amazing report, which is one of the seminal documents of the ecosystem developments and the understanding of the ecosystems. And that basically is the ISCDI report, which is the International Shipping Center Development Index report. Now, here, I must actually see that we, in the last episode, looked at the DNV Menon report. I actually feel that the DNV Menon report, while being extremely useful and quite amazing in terms of the content it covers with a very clear structure, is still dwarfed compared to the kind of information flow that I see in the Baltic Xinhua report. I mean, it's really amazing what you guys do. There's so much of information. There's so much of classification, and there's so much of depth in terms of how these ecosystems are functioning. One of the aspects which you go more detailed into is also the port side of it, which is obviously something which is very, very interesting and to look at, because I know that there's only one ecosystem that I can think of which doesn't have a very thriving port in the world, but still has an ecosystem status, and that is Oslo, for example. It doesn't have a huge port, but it's been a very much part of the ecosystem as such, Copenhagen to an extent as well. But if you look at the Asian side of it, you look at the London aspect of it, you look at the Singapore, which has been leading the charts, all of them have basically got port as a key aspect of the growth story. And that's why the depth as well as the focus on the port side is really, really refreshing to see. So my congratulations to both of you and to your organizations for bringing out this report year on year and doing so much in terms of research and analysis. Let me start a question with both of you to ask you, how did this collaboration on this amazing report come about? You know, what was the thinking to create such a report? If you can give me a bit of background, what made Xinhua and Baltic come together and look at this report? Maybe Alex, you want to start, and then Jin, maybe after this.
I think I can start with this question. And actually, it's my when I joined this team in 2019, is the sixth year of the report has been published to the world. And I may not know every detail of this story, but the story I know. Actually, in the year of 2009, in China, demand to build a better maritime center, a shipping center in Shanghai. And at that time, actually, we don't have very clear definition of what a shipping center is. So we started this research, and we connected to the Baltic Exchange, and which is the world famous, the third party institution, right? So, and we started. I think we started this research in year 2012, and after 2 years research, we introduced the whole system to the world, and the first report was launched in the year of 2014, and now in the year 2024, it's the 11th report, I think. That is all the. And also, we don't want to. We also in China, we don't want to set a yardstick with only in China's perspective. We need a global vision of how shipping center is developed. So this research is open to the worldwide.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jen. You're up
Thanks.
next.
And perfect sort of finish from Alex there about the global vision, and actually very good timing from you as well, Punit. You know, there was the 10th year anniversary of the report last year. So we were very proud and happy about this collaboration. As Alex says, the first report was published in 2014, and it was that sort of global outlook, the idea that you could marry, and you're talking all about these, ecosystems and collaboration. We could marry the sort of economic expertise, the data expertise, the information services that CEIS brings, and the Baltics, maritime experience and maritime knowledge to come together to form this report, and that's really how it started. As Alex says, it took a couple of years to get this off the ground, but we're very happy with what we started. We're very happy with what it has produced, and how over time you can also see that report evolve and match the trends and the changes that are happening within the maritime space, within the maritime ecosystem, and within the port ecosystem as well. For example, in the last year or two, there's been more of an interest in things like smart ports, for example. And so and of course, it's a reflection of sort of like the data and how that's used as well, that you can see ports change their rankings over time, and that's also reflected in sort of like discussions and talks around these ports as well. So yeah, it's a great collaboration that we've had, and really a very good and opportune sort of coming together of two, I suppose, very different types of expertise and knowledge and skills to produce this report.
But that's brilliant, because I think the idea behind a ecosystem analysis is usually also to try and kind of help companies who are looking at different ecosystems. Do you see the kind of uptake based on the reports over the last 10 years? What kind of feedback have you had? What kind of customers have actually come and told you that we found this to be very useful, or we found this to be very relevant? Have you actually seen any kind of, let's say, who are your main target clients, and have you actually been able to tick boxes there? Maybe Baltic has a very wide clientele, not individual, but even company members. And obviously CEIS has the same, but China itself has so much to offer that you can easily kind of have a few countries subsumed in the kind of demand that China brings to the table. But what have been client feedbacks? What have been the people that you actually have been targeting have actually come back and said, we've used this report in this way, we've set up a new idea to go to this ecosystem because we see something interesting happening? Is that happening? Is that actually helping in the report, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing, especially in the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and we also know how important ports have been in supporting, the global economy, during COVID and post-COVID. So certainly in the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've had a lot of our members. We've had a lot of companies who are not members of the Baltic come and refer to the report. And many of them, say, oh yeah, I know about the Baltic now through the report or something. So, we've certainly had a kind of global recognition about the report, and not only from traditional companies like shipping companies or cargo owners, but certainly we're getting a lot more interest from the ports themselves.
Interesting.
I've heard from numerous ports now. Everybody, of course, wants to move up the rankings and all that, but it's also very interesting, right, that they actually do read the report itself and observe that, this port's actually improved in this particular sector, or done something with that fuel or something like that. And so what else are the factors that go in? So it certainly made people also think, what makes an important port? What are the factors that drive the importance of a port? Beyond simply the throughput, which is obviously very important, but perhaps some of the services that can come that you might not have considered when actually considering a port city.
Interesting. Alex, what about you? Have you actually seen some feedback from the Chinese and other customers?
Yeah, from our side, we receive many feedback from port groups and also some government authorities. In China, I think Shanghai, Ningbo, Qingdao, these cities all really care about our report. They care about the ranking. They do their best to improve themselves with under our system of the evaluation. And also we received other feedbacks from maybe Hong Kong, like Hong Kong. And I think our research restored their evidence, their evidence in the industry. And in the past 5 years, we received feedback from Dubai, which is from UAE, and also Athens, and we had several meetings with the Athens purveyors government. And
yep, that's interesting. That's very nice to know. And obviously, when I was looking at the series, I actually was thinking about how ecosystems come about. As Jin rightly mentioned, that for many years it was a one-horse race. In maritime, pretty much London was the only ecosystem which functioned, and I think that was organic because it grew. I've studied in London. I've lived in London for many years. I know that it's a very organic kind of a system because it grew because of political, economic, and other aspects that happened. And trade, of course, was a big part of that discussion. And then, of course, you had the single horse race going into maybe multiple horses, but still not going completely crazy with the whole race course out there, which is the case now. So now you actually had Singapore, Shanghai, and others coming in, which were basically coming on back of some real initiatives being pushed. So you had nurtured ecosystems. London being an organic ecosystem, Singapore, Shanghai being more nurtured ecosystem. And then if you see what's happened with the Dubai you mentioned, that I would call a circumstantial ecosystem because Middle East came up as a hub. And this is a bit of geopolitics to think about it, that before the Arab nations and Middle East nations started taking things on their own hands in terms of trade and shipping, they were pretty much in collaboration with European, American, and other companies and other countries, and they were driving those shipping and other related aspects from their own bases. The minute they became independent as well as started running their own so-called shipping and trade space, they started building that ecosystem. And while I find the first one which ran off the post was Dubai, and they actually started getting more and more advantages because not just in the rest of the Middle East, but even in UAE, Dubai is seen as the best place to go and set up, right? So do you actually see these three models being utilized? I think organically, some ecosystems may still be there, but it's difficult to get a London scale again. But to replicate what Singapore has done, Shanghai has done, and circumstances developing in places like Dubai being replicated in other places, do you see any future ecosystems on the horizon in your report saying these are the future stars to watch out, rising stars as I call them? Yeah. Go ahead, Alex. Your probably idea is starting point. I'm sure there are enough in China as well who you can talk about. Yeah.
Okay. For this question, I think before we talk about this question, I think we should figure out what makes a maritime ecosystem, right? As we all know, the whole basic operating system of the global shipping was established many years ago in UK, right? The leadership of UK, and all the laws, conventions were established many years ago. So the whole operation system established basically, in my opinion, the international trade maybe play a very critical role in the ecosystem system of buildings. So where goods is and where good is, where market is, that makes the ecosystem maritime ecosystem. So in this situation, we may look at some rapid growing economics, maybe like India. I think Mumbai will be the future star, and we should really care about it. Not just care about it, we should focus on it. And some other cities in the Southeast Asia, right? Like Ho Chi Minh Port in Vietnam,
Right.
and also some other ports from South America. I think maybe the Chiang port in Peru.
Hmm.
Also some fast-growing economy in Europe, maybe the Gdansk port in Poland. I think they all driven. This may be driven by the fast-growing economy and international trading. That's my opinion.
Interesting. That's some very interesting ports there as well as cities. And obviously, in India, more than Mumbai, I know for a fact that Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has pushed during his time as Chief Minister of Gujarat, this idea of a gift city, which is basically setting up an offshore entity within the onshore space. And the Gift City and IFSCA, the two bodies which are actually interconnected, are essentially looking at trying to create a similar ecosystem as Singapore, basically giving tax benefits and other benefits to the people who want to set up there, and then obviously use the local talent and everything else that goes along with it. So there's a bit of an interesting space in India, which is actually now a lot more shipping focused for sure. But Jin, with your case with Baltic Exchange, there is one additional advantage you sit with. You sit with the membership base in the various parts of the world who are in the activities. And if they see themselves growing, that is primarily because they see the ecosystem being worth tapping into. Do you see members coming and actually, opening up offices, getting more members in there, talking about some future exciting spaces? And that would be very interesting to hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and we do, again, I mentioned this earlier, and I think what's really quite cool about the report is that whilst obviously the most important thing, which is port throughput and port usage, is a key factor, there is also a lot of weight given to other services that come in a port. Right, the business services, insurance, and all that, the legal services, the arbitration and rule of law, and all the other stuff that comes with the port, and that covers the diversity of the Baltics membership as well. And so we certainly hear from our members about interest in these ports globally. Alex has already mentioned a few of them. He has been a little bit modest about the ports in China, who are doing fantastically. Shanghai has always been up there, but Ningbo Zhoushan, for example, rose a spot last year, and again, not just on throughput, on the strength of throughput, but on other services that are starting to get really focused with all that. But of the ports, other ports that Alex has mentioned, I agree. I think the India one is certainly one to watch. Not least because I think the importance of India as an economy going forward would naturally lead to sort of that concentration of these services and uses of the ports in India, for example, the main one like Mumbai. And also, of course, then around the world, you mentioned Oslo right at the start. Again, a port which has little throughput, but very strong with services. So again, a lot of members, a lot of our partners that the Baltic has, participate in this stuff. The law firms, the insurance companies, and we're starting to get other things like accountants and consultants and things like that. Certainly, focus and more members getting involved with these developing ports around the world. They're still crucial. Ports are still crucial for international trade. They all, it still accounts for 90% of trade. So very important, and very important to see these ports develop as well in the various categories. Again, I mentioned earlier, smart ports, clean fuels. Ports are leading the way in a lot of these developments as well.
Interesting. And I agree with you 100%. India, in point, having basically lived there and grown up there, The kind of coastline that India has is phenomenal. And both minor and major ports are lifeline of literally, and what they're looking at is also coastal inland waterways, a whole bunch of things which can actually help the ecosystem. So that's a very interesting space. Just the expanse is like China, very huge. And you can try a lot of new ideas if you have a smaller, let's say, canvas to work with. I know a lot of electric container ships and feeder ships are being used on the Yangtze River, for example, to start with, because it's far easier just to do it over the river space because they have the ability to tap into charging stations and whatever else you might want. And then you suddenly expand that and look at a pilot which can be done. India hasn't really followed up in that area, which is trying to do. So something to watch out for sure. But let's look at ecosystem collaboration. This is something that I actually find very interesting, that companies which have offices all over, like I've worked in Klaveness for many years. When I was in Klaveness, I realized that in subconsciously I was tapping into my Dubai office or Shanghai office or Oslo office accordingly to try and make sure that whatever that particular ecosystem can offer the best, I try and use those resources, whether it is like you mentioned, Jin, consultants, brokers, insurance companies, law firms, all these things we were actually trying to basically cherry pick, as I call it. But what that meant was that we actually were able to do it because we were a company which had multiple offices to work with. But if an ecosystem itself starts collaborating, so my example would be that, let's say, in finance, we still find that UK is way ahead of the curve. Shipping finance is more America, UK at the moment. But physical trade, port, and then, of course, the services side, you have got other people who might be better than UK, US. Do you see the ability for ecosystems to start collaborating and saying, we are going to offer both our ecosystem stakeholders, all companies in Singapore and US, for example, can actually use the Singapore for, let's say, tax benefits, while US for raising finance? Which means that while SGX has a role to play per se, but you can easily have dual listings, you can have a lot of symbiotic relationships which built up. As a company, I see that happening. But have you ever discussed this with stakeholders in ecosystems? Say, are ecosystems even thinking about leveraging their USPs and bringing it together to service their customers in one shot as one-stop entry point or one-stop service point? Have you ever seen this concept being talked about?
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting idea. And in fact, in the last year or two, I've actually seen quite a bit of this in the trips I've had to China to, together with Alex. We see a lot of the ports now signing sort of inter-port agreements and things like that, which I think is fantastic. No man is an island, no port is an island, and
Yes.
and at the end of the day, a ship goes from one port to another. A port cannot exist in isolation. Um, I think Singapore is a very good example of what you talked about. Of course, we've got strong container throughput and all the services here. But we've also seen, for example, lots of international firms setting up in Singapore, have set up in Singapore traditionally over time. And these are firms then with offices around the world, large law firms, large insurance firms, large brokerage houses, large brokers. And through that network alone, you get to build a lot of these synergies and a lot of these opportunities where you could be a shipping company in Singapore, but you needed an opinion on a particular port, something specific to a port in Athens. You could go to a law firm here in Singapore, and they could give you an opinion about Athens. And I think that's sort of the important sort of connections, and you have to go all the way to Europe to get one. So as these as ports internationalize as well and get more of these foreign firms in, more of this international expertise in, that's sort of like that natural development and evolution of these ecosystems again. I like all those services that come around a port and the expertise that comes with it. And I think that's the way that that will grow.
Interesting. I hope it does. Alex, have you seen any examples of that where there have been like, let's literally like a seamless corridor of, you enter Singapore, but in reality, you're entering Singapore and Shanghai together.
Uh, But this is a really interesting question, and I think a little bit hard to answer. But there's one simple about the collaborating with the China and Shanghai and London. I think there's a college called SMU, Shanghai Maritime University.
Yes.
They built they have a project together with the LMAA to encouraging students to learn about the arbitration and be their arbitrators under the LMAA. And that's what our government do in the past few years, and we encourage students to not also students, also some professionals to understand what the LMAA rules, and also to be LMAA arbitrators, and it's for the past years, it is the very weak point of Shanghai, and the government is trying their best to improve themselves under the rules of LMAA.
Interesting. That's a very interesting example, because the legal side, and again, I'm also a lawyer, so I understand this better than most of the people, is that the more older the ecosystem is, or the legal the ecosystem in London, for example, the more richer it gets, because there are so many cases which, even though another country like Singapore and others want to catch up as far as the legal precedents are concerned, it's challenging because you have hundreds of years of precedents that you need to catch up with, right? And there is so much of clarity. But I think what is really interesting from my perspective, and this is just my perspective, that with technology coming, we might be able to re-engineer some of the legal concepts going forward. Like electronic bills of lading, for example, Singapore was one of the first countries which actually acknowledged and incorporated a law giving the same status to EBLs as normal paper bills of lading, the Electronic Transactions Act. And then, of course, now London has followed suit as well. But what I'm trying to say is that it's only with new technology that you can rewrite the legal precedents. Otherwise, if you follow the old space of doing things, you are never going to beat London. I just generally believe that when it comes to choosing the English law, you still prefer to use it all the time. And that's really what is interesting from that perspective. One of the areas which your report, I'm so glad that it talks about, is the changing trade patterns, the geopolitics of it, the way that it's actually the trade has changed over a period of time. And I think this is the last question. We don't have too much of time. But the idea is that how does international trade kind of feature in this space? Because when you look at tangible aspects about infrastructure, services, ports, throughput, these are all tangible aspects. International trade and trade flows are constantly and dynamically changing. So how do you actually account for that in your ecosystem ranking, center rankings, when it comes to changing trade flows? So Trump coming in and all these things that he's talking about with Mexico and Canada, probably a bit of change of trade flows, 100% happening because of that. And trade-wise, Mexico and Canada are the largest partners of US. So if trade does move away from Canada and Mexico into US, it most likely will create, much longer trade routes and new partners coming in as far as America is concerned. How does ecosystems manage that, and how do you incorporate that in your report? That's a very interesting idea, and I would love to hear about it.
Okay. No,
Maybe we take another angle to this. The other angle is, do you see certain ecosystems more resilient and adaptive to these changes in trade flows? Are you seeing certain ecosystems actually thinking about this? I know Singapore thinks about it all the time, including everybody from the Prime Minister down to the MPA team is basically talking about what is the relevance of Singapore, where do we do it? But I don't see the same discussion happening in a big way in Oslo, for example, or I don't see that big discussion happening in Athens as well, which predominantly is looking at ship owning and related services and basically looking at that. So if you're kind of focusing on an internal space more than external space, your resilience and adaptability is different from the other. Not saying right or wrong, but do you rank ecosystems based on that? Do you actually see in your conversations with ecosystems, when you rank them, when you talk to them, how much is the resilience and adaptability a factor of the external looking attitude versus internal looking attitude? Maybe that's a better question to answer, Alex. Yeah.
I think I need a few minutes. Maybe Ching to answer the question first.
Yep, Jin, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah. So my view would be that ports, governments, port authorities will always try to do the best for their city, for their port, for their ecosystem.
Right.
And of course, different ones will arrive at different conclusions depending on the situation at the time, historical precedents, and of course any strategy or idea that they may have. Now, of course, we know that Singapore has always been at the forefront of being innovative around how they handle these things for the last 30, 40 years, right? Developing, everybody likes to talk about how we've gone from a little red dot to where we are today. And we haven't achieved that by only looking inwardly, because there's not much to look at inwardly.
Sure.
We depend very much on global trade, global services, and so therefore we adapt ourselves to that, and that includes our maritime ecosystem as well. I think as trade patterns change, the effect of that, whilst we don't measure the trade patterns in the report itself,
yes,
how that manifests in the port stats and data that we do measure will be reflected that way.
Yes.
And so very simply or simplistically, if you're going to score worse in your throughput, then in order to maintain your ranking, you're going to have to do better with your legal services. Let's say, I'm just making it up here now.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
But
just as an example,
that's how it's going to play out, at least when it comes to the report, and if you're concerned about where you are in the standings on the report and all that, that would be how it would play out. That would be what you would do, right? And you would imagine that port authorities, governments would do that if they see that their port throughput is going down. They're going to try to find other ways to maintain the relevance and the importance of their ecosystem, boost their insurance, for example. There are some things as a port you can control and some you can't. But you do your best with what you can, and those statistics will play out.
But it's very interesting that you mentioned that. Before I come to you, Alex, because I see that in Middle East, in Singapore, even in India now to an extent, but China to a great extent, they have actually realized that even though they may have a lot of, like India and China, they may have a lot of domestic population and domestic demand as such, but they have continued to invest abroad. They have continued to basically use that expertise and the opportunities away from their own hinterland, so as to speak. The Middle East has always been investing as a sovereign fund all across the globe. But India and China actually look at this as a very strategic way of doing it. And this is away from the BRI. The BRI is a much bigger part of the scheme, or a big part of the discussion. Within BRI, the maritime roadmap has been very, very strong when it comes to investments. And I think that's a good example of how trade patterns and geopolitics is kind of impacting trade flows. Because when I was in Venice or in Athens or Piraeus, I saw the fact that Costco was basically managing those ports was a part of a much wider game plan, because they knew they need to spread their bets a little bit. Otherwise, current downturn, for example, or slowdown, if you can call it a 5% slowdown, I generally don't think so. But if it's called a slowdown in China, they are still hedging their bets by actually having some growth areas in other parts of the world where they're invested. Singapore needs to do it because they don't have a choice. As you say, the hinterland is too small. But yes, I agree with you that eventually it will percolate into the report through the throughput numbers. And that's what's going to be quite interesting to see as well. Alex, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll add something. I think now the shipping industry was impacted. There are more impacts brought to the shipping industry because the rapid development of the world, right?
Yeah.
I would like to start with the 2 points. The first is the technology points. And now there's a lot of new technologies that are coming to the industry, the IoT, the AI. I think maybe in the future, the autonomous vessel, maybe a very important trend of the whole industry will be. So where it can operate, where it can build these vessels and maybe more competitive. And also another one is the rules changing, right? Even those old rules are established many years ago, but new rules are coming now, like greenhouse gas emission, the EU ETS, and they may brought a lot of impact to the industry. So where it can supply a clean fuel, alternative fuel, maybe more important to the industry. And also there's some other challenges made. Even 1 day ago, President Donald Trump has claimed to take back the Panama Canal, and what aim may bring impact to the industry, I think is not known yet. So I think even the world is changing. I think the trend of international trade is changing, but technology and the new rules, I mean, that mentioned, and is always the important thing. So,
Sure.
and also,
yeah, go ahead.
Also the Chinese port and Chinese government are really focused on new technologies and emission.
Absolutely, and I think they are also automating a lot of the ports. I recently went to one in near Shanghai, and it's fully automated, and it's pretty impressive to see how things are kind of changing in that space as well, because throughput is there, and Tuas coming up in Singapore is the same example. A lot more automation, a lot more technology, which means that information and data becomes a lot more relevant and actionable as well. Which is where adaptability comes in. I'll end the podcast with just one question to both of you. If we have to look at the next 4 years, and it's going to be very choppy with Trump coming in and everything that he's doing, as I keep saying to most of the people when I talk about geopolitics, is that this time around he is fearless because he doesn't have to worry about re-election. He's a little bit more. He's not concerned about what should he do to seek another election, because he doesn't have to seek another election. So I think he's going to be crazy in terms of some of the ideas he's going to bring up, and he's already talking about a few of them. But my question to you is that based on all the ecosystems and all the studies that you guys do, and you talk about this all the time, which country, not even the port, I think the port is a part of the ecosystem anyway, but which country you think has got the most to benefit from in the next 4 years, just probably from trade perspective, from a perspective of benefiting even with trickle down stuff. It doesn't have to be direct impact of Trump's policies, but because Trump's policies help somebody else, this country might actually benefit directly or indirectly. Any thoughts on one country that you think is kind of going to be singled out? It doesn't have to be anybody in your list of ecosystems, but just generally thoughts on that. Any country that comes to mind?
For the US itself.
All right. Yes, let's make America great again.
Make America great again. But I think it's this could go anywhere, right? We don't know how this will play out, and these would be sort of everybody would probably have their own views and ideas. Sure. The US will clearly be perhaps look a little bit more inwardly and see what they can do, and maybe take a lesser presence in the world stage, and other countries may step up and fill that gap. But I think what would be most interesting And I think the one everyone's going to talk about is trade wars coming up. Is what will be most interesting is what other countries who are affected by the trade wars may how they may respond.
On and retaliate,
And
yes.
that respond may have then the trickle down effects to their own trade partners and everything that happens around there. I think therefore the US. Perhaps the rhetoric is quite a lot of rhetoric has been about China and what China's response might be to that rhetoric. But then actually the most interesting, I think, trickle down from that is what Southeast Asia would happen to Southeast Asia and what may be what may happen or what opportunities that may bring to us. So interesting times, I must say, but sometimes not the most obvious one. The trickle down may be the more interesting result.
I agree. Alex, you have a country or a region in mind?
Yeah, I don't think there's one specific country I can say, but I think in this situation, any country which persists to do the right things, may definitely may benefit from in the 4 years. I think what means the right things is to work hard for their own industry, to build their own industry and to raise the wages of all the peoples. I think if any country do so, they will have a good future. But not any question. There's some kind of political issue. I really don't know about it.
No, that's okay. That's fine. My money is on Vietnam. I actually believe that Vietnam has got the potential of being one of those buffer countries where China is comfortable investing, and America has now got a better understanding and a better and I think this geopolitics creeping in here, but there's a degree of guilt there as well. With what the history is, they're trying to do a lot of changes. Mexico would have probably thought about it, but Mexico now seems to be in the grip of some real challenging rhetoric from Trump as well. So let's see in what it is. But again, this is really interesting because I believe an ecosystem needs these kind of knee-jerk sudden reactions to inject some ideas and maybe even investments. So in the next 4 years, if somebody decides that Vietnam is actually the right place to invest heavily, we might finally find Alex's prediction of Ho Chi Minh City being one of those places to watch out for going forward. But this has been an absolute pleasure, guys. We've covered a lot of ground. Your report is phenomenally great, and I hope and I continue to see the report going forward. Of course, being from Singapore, I hope Singapore remains at the top of it. But in general, I think it's great to see this kind of information coming out. When I started launching this podcast, your report was the first one that came to my mind. And it's really, really a pleasure to talk to both of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Punit.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.